Yes, indeed, everyone. Welcome once again to another episode of Darker Than Blue here on WPFW 89.3 FM in the Washington, D.C. metro area. If you are in Maryland, D.C., or Virginia, you should be hearing my voice. I am Jackie Lukman. This is Darker Than Blue on WPFW, and I am so happy to be here this Friday, overcast, gloomy, wet, rainy, drizzly, humid, typical of DC. We should be used to this sticky, overcast kind of, what do I want to call it? Oppressive feeling sort of weather that we have. But you know what? It's needed. We're not happy with the flooding that is happening, that is coming from these tropical storms, but as a gardener, this rain is definitely needed. We needed the break in the heat that this cool spike or this cool wave brings us. Unfortunately, we're getting the edges of some tropical depressions where there's a lot of flooding going on in other places, and we're certainly concerned about the well-being and the health of our friends and neighbors who are victims of that flooding. But here in DC, we're just wet and steamy and hot. So that's actually a good thing for a couple of days. Hey, it is Friday. It's been a long week. It's been a week. I think the next few months from now till November, y'all, I think is going to be not just interesting, but a little bit anxiety producing and kind of a roller coaster ride. And it's going to be an interesting time, I think, during this election season. And to dig into some of the issues that we are facing in this election season, I'm going to try to have lots of people on who can talk about this stuff with us and for us, so that we can really get a good mix, a variety of analysis, because, it's easy for me to sit here and just give you my opinion on all of the things. But sometimes, actually, most of the time in this election season, we need a lot more voices to convey this, to convey the analysis of this very confusing, very unprecedented, I think, election season. And today is going to be, I think, one of those shows. If my comrade can get on, we're going to talk about Tim Waltz. We don't know a lot about him. Those of us who don't live in Wisconsin, we know that Vice President and presidential candidate, or presumptive presidential candidate, Kamala Harris, has chosen Tim Walz to be her vice presidential running mate. He is the governor of Wisconsin. And when we look at the media around Walz, we see that he's being described as a progressive. He's being described as almost like the savior of the Democratic Party. There are people who are talking about the good things that he has done in Wisconsin, or the things that he has done that they have approved of, that are progressive in nature. Things like legislating for Wisconsin free school lunch, and some other really good things that we're going to talk about. But there are also other aspects of his record that we don't know a whole lot about, that is not being talked about a lot in the media, that I think we do need to talk about. And some of those things are being raised in some left or leftist media outlets. And we want to talk about them a little bit. And I think I want to start with this article from Vox, which says that they actually ask the question, and I have to remember to start our shows here on Darker Than Blue with the disclaimer that the Thoughts and opinions expressed on this show may not be reflective of the thoughts and opinions of the management of WPFW or other programmers or Pacifica. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this show are those of the host and my guests entirely. All right. So thank you, Minnesota. He's the governor of Minnesota. Thank you for those of you who are watching us over on Black Liberation Media on YouTube. Thanks so much for the correction, David Silberg. I appreciate that. I'm sorry, Dean Ramsey was the one who corrected me on where he is the governor, which is Minnesota and not Wisconsin. Thank you. So Vox is asking if Tim Waltz is a progressive or a centrist or both. And they point out, Vox does, and the person who wrote this article is Andrew Prokop, and he is described by Vox as a senior politics correspondent at the outlet covering the White House elections and political scandals and investigations. So he says that Senator Joe Manchin, who they are describing as an independent of West Virginia, and we know that Joe Manchin is not really an independent. He is very much a conservative, even though he does not identify or represent the GOP in his designation. In his designation, but his policies may speak to something else. And Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York and progressive, self-described progressive and member of the squad, what's left of it, they even though they disagree about policy and politics, they both agree. Now, they are on opposite ends of the political spectrum, even within the same political party, but they both agree that Walz is an excellent vice presidential nominee. Manchin, and I had to describe Joe Manchin the way I did because Joe Manchin is the kind of politician that I feel like folks maybe would be wary of receiving an endorsement from. But Joe Manchin says that Governor Walz is the real deal. He'd bring balance back to the Democratic Party. Now, that's rich coming from Joe Manchin, who is, or at least was, a member of the Democratic Party, a representative of the Democratic Party, and he certainly didn't want to bring balance to the party. He was very much way, way to the right of the Democratic Party, and he still is. So it's very interesting that he would say that Waltz is, that he will bring balance back to the Democratic Party. He said, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said that Walz is a uniter for not just the Democratic Party, but for the entire United States. I'm not sure what that means, but we're going to try to get into a little of what that could mean and if maybe that's enough, right? So Vox goes on to say that the fact that Walz appeals to two of the most ideologically disparate Democrats, or former Democrat in Manchin's case, is encouraging to the party. But it also suggests that possibly the possibility that everyone is projecting their own agendas and expectations onto Walz, and that some people are going to be wrong. And really what I believe it is that some people are going to be disappointed. So Vox is asking, is he a true believing progressive with an everyman coding personal style? Or is he a pragmatic politician willing to rein in what the author says are the excesses of the left? That's a very weird way to describe whatever the left is in this country, which I absolutely admit. The left is weak. We are fractured. There really is no discernible left in this country that poses a real challenge to the status quo. But we organizers, we radical organizers, we socialists, we communists, we Pan-Africanists, we First Nations folks, we working class, poor, and oppressed people who are organizing against the oppressions of this system are working to rebuild the left. And particularly in this moment, this historical moment, we are working in particular to build a united front against fascism, and not a fascism that is arising as if fascism does not already exist in this country. We're working to build a united front against fascism that is already here and has been when George Jackson identified it in 1976 when he wrote Blood in My Eye. Do you understand? So yes, we are behind the eight ball. We on the left, we're behind the eight ball. We are playing catch up. We have a lot of work to do. We are fractured. We are weak, but we are not dormant. We are not hopeless. We are not without passion, and we are working our behinds off to actually rebuild this left to respond to what people want to build when this empire passes on. Because all empires pass on. This is not a controversial political statement. All empires sunset. They all go away. They all weaken. They all collapse to a certain degree under the weight of their own excesses. And every empire has excesses when they are in power for far too long and the reach of their power extends far too wide. And certainly that can be said of the American empire. And this is what we understand, those of us radical organizers who are working to build this united front to fight and destroy fascism that has extended the power and influence and oppression of the American empire beyond acceptability. And this is again, this is not a political statement. This is an issue of human rights. Because as we understand, if we pay any attention to history, when we are talking about empires, empires do not expand and extend their power through peaceful means. They don't extend their influence and control over other countries and markets and people through peaceful and gentlemanly negotiations between leaders. That might be a part of it at first. But when the country that is the target of the expansion of influence and power says to the empire, oh, no, we really don't want you telling us how to run our country. We don't want you having unfettered access to our natural resources so that you can profit off of them. Because if we give you access to our resources, how can we use our natural resources to take care of our people? As soon as the leaders and the people of a country that the empire wants to control responds to the empire in that way, saying, hey, I appreciate you all and thank you so much for your interest, but no thank you. We do not want your type of partnership. Then the empire becomes angry. And instead of backing away from those negotiations that failed because the other country did not want to be involved in this type of a relationship, in an oppressive, unfair, unequal, master servant empire colony relationship with the imperialist rather power, then the empire gets angry. And instead of just walking away and saying, okay, well, maybe you'll change your mind later, or what can we do to change your mind? What the empire usually does is to respond to the lack of interest in the relationship by saying, oh, well, we're just going to take what we want then. And this is why empire, while people inside the empire, and this is every empire that has ever existed, people inside the empire have a pretty good deal because they are benefiting off of the profits of the control of other people, other countries, and other countries and people's resources. Yeah, all of that profit and money and yeah, it makes our lives more comfortable than the lives of the people in the country that this empire has decided to now take over, since they did not want to enter into an unequal relationship with them. So yes, we inside the beating heart of the empire do not see the other end of that relationship. We see the benefits. And we don't even realize, because we don't see the entire relationship, we don't quite realize that we're not actually getting a whole lot of benefits. We are marginalized and oppressed inside the empire because we are being exploited to keep the empire propped up, to keep its heart beating from the inside. And we are also kept separated from people who are subjected to the oppressive power of the empire, the militarism, the sanctions, the condemnation, because countries oppose the oppressive nature of the empire. Because we don't see the entire relationship, we don't understand that we have more in common with those people who are fighting against the empire, trying to take over their countries and their resources. We have more in common with those people than we do with this empire that we live in. So, of course, the empire that we live in has a vested interest in making sure that we never understand that we are connected to those folks on the other side of imperialism, those other folks who are in the crosshairs of imperialism, like our brothers and sisters in Kenya who are in the streets right now as I am speaking. You know, it is our people right now, those of you who are listening to me as I am speaking. Young people in Kenya are in the streets opposing not only the ridiculous tax hikes that President William Ruto is proposing, but they're also opposing imperialism and the control of their resources and their markets and their land by imperialist forces like the United States, through not just AFRICOM, the U.S. Africa Command in across the continent of Africa, but also multinational corporations that are European in origin, who exploit the labor of Kenyans in order to extract the resources that are shipped off to foreign markets to be sold. And the people in Kenya do not get the benefit from those resources at all. We have more in common, folks, with our young brothers and sisters in the streets in Kenya than we do with the people on Capitol Hill, making decisions, making policies about how to crush the rebellion in Kenya and maintain control of the resources and the infrastructure in Kenya so that the empire can continue to profit and the people in Kenya can continue to be oppressed and exploited to continue to make that profit. We have more in common with those folks in the streets than we do with the politicians on Capitol Hill who are making the policies to keep those people oppressed. That's why they're in the streets. So I'm really happy that I am joined today by my friend and comrade and very, very smart brother. Anthony Rogers-Wright. Let me see if I can get you on the screen. Anthony, can you hear me?
Yes, good afternoon, my dear sister. I sure can.
Fantastic. I'm so happy to have you on. Thank you, Anthony, for coming. Anthony Rogers-Wright, as I said, very, very smart brother. Climate. I don't like the word activist as my own personal thing. It's not, it's just my personal thing, right? I
Yeah.
I don't see you as a climate activist. You to me are a climate warrior. You to me
Oh,
are the climate guru for Africans and other indigenous folks who, when we talk about climate issues, we never think about the frontline communities, the
yeah.
African communities, the indigenous communities, the Latinx communities that are the first targets, the first victims of the climate catastrophe we're already experiencing, Anthony.
That's right.
So Anthony is all about this work. And I had to have him on to talk about Tim Walz because, Anthony, according to many people in Minnesota, and a lot of people outside of Minnesota, and I think it's actually mostly people outside of Minnesota, which is why I'm suspicious. But I need you to confirm this. A lot of people are saying Tim Walz is going to be it for climate change. He is going to set the policy for climate change that we need. And as much as I pride myself on doing my little internet, I can't even call it research. I'm just Googling stuff and putting two and two together and all this kind of reading and all this kind of stuff. But you have your pulse on the ground, your thumb on the pulse of the climate community in Minnesota. So you tell us, Anthony, is Tim Walz the progressive climate a leader that we need, or is there something we're missing here?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the question. And I think that where it stems from, and pardon the shameless plug, but you were a guest on the inaugural program of my forthcoming show on WPFW Full Spectrum with Anthony Rogers.
Woohoo!
And I think that the first one of the things that we discussed with Comrade Ajamu is just this word progressive to begin with, right? We really don't know what that term means anymore because a lot of people would apply that to even President Biden's climate policies,
Mhm.
right? And I think that what's happened is, and I think you nailed it about in your assessment of the so-called left, at least in the context of the United States, it's in disarray right now. So you even have people, you named Ocasio-Cortez and two former members of the squad, or soon to be former members of the squad, at least for now, and Bowman and Bush, even their shift towards I should say, jumping up and down and really promoting a so-called Green New Deal. Although, as we'll talk about in a moment, the Democratic Party Green New Deal is not the original one or the one that I think of, right? I think of the Green parties because that was out like years before AOC hit the scene. But they shifted from that to becoming essentially cheerleaders for Biden's so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which is not a progressive piece of climate policy. So based on my assessment and speaking to comrades on the ground, in Minnesota, like our dear sister, Indigenous leader and warrior, and tribal attorney Tara Hauska,
Mhm.
who, really can speak to this better than certainly than a lot of the national groups who I think have thrown their support behind Waltz without really having any knowledge or even speaking to folk, right? Which is so different than how we operate in the Black radical tradition.
Mhm.
I might have done my own research, but I would not have said anything publicly about Tim Waltz until speaking to someone like Tara and speaking to other people who are doing environmental justice work in the state of Minnesota, and even people who are doing work associated with climate change, so housing, people who are doing abolition work. This is all connected to the larger climate crisis. So, a lot of these groups have made endorsements, I think, without being fully informed. And therefore that's really, really not just inappropriate, but it's dangerous, right? And it's not doing a service to your members who, send you monthly donations, who may rely on you to provide a full assessment. So let's just start with like going back to his record in the Congress. What we do know is that Tim Waltz was a moderate Democrat, a middle of the road a Democrat who, knew how to get along very well with Speaker Pelosi, which sometimes is a requisite, I guess, if you want to keep your jobs, as we've seen with the ousting of Bush and Bowman. And he did vote for the Keystone XL pipeline, which even Obama, eventually rescinded, right? The Keystone XL pipeline is something that would have, a pipeline that would have gone through his state, would have gone through sovereign tribal territory in his state. And the fact that he voted for that gives you a basis for, where he is on climate. Well, not to be outdone by his vote on Keystone XL pipeline, as the governor of Minnesota, he did approve or at least allowed for the framework that allowed for the construction and now operation of the infamous Line 3 pipeline, which is right now disrupting the way of life and cultural sovereignty and territorial sovereignty of indigenous people in Minnesota. This is a pipeline that is transporting crude oil close to one of the most important bodies of water to the United States, if not the world, that being the Mississippi River, right? Minnesota, the headwaters of the Mississippi River are in Minnesota. And this is where a lot of indigenous people do a lot of their tribal activities on water, whether it's, fishing or the collection of wild rice. That's in some ways disrupted now by Line 3. So, I mean, that in itself, two major interstate pipelines that are benefiting foreign interests, maybe creating like a handful of jobs in the short term, but in the long term, it's profits for a Canadian corporation that's benefiting from Line 3. And sacrificing environmental justice communities as a result. This is not what I would consider to be progressive climate policy. Okay, so then you have a lot of these, I call them the bourgeois environmental organizations, who are lauding a bill that he signed that would make Minnesota, quote unquote, carbon free by the year 2040. This sounds really, really good until you read the bill. And I'll send you, Sister Jackie, an article that was written by a local newspaper. And I mean, I think it's important to just name the headline of the article, the Minnesota Star Tribune in Minnesota, and the title of the piece is "Minnesota wants to be carbon free by 2040, but it still hasn't been decided what that means." And this is very, very important.
That is very bad.
Right, because it's just like what a lot of, unfortunately, the bourgeois environmental groups have done with the phrase clean energy or carbon free is the same thing that we're seeing being done to the phrase progressive. It's just sort of whatever you want it to be at the time that you want it to be something that you need, right? So you can make Joe Biden a progressive if you need a progressive at that moment, right? And apparently with Tim Waltz, or you can be carbon free. Now, carbon free in the Waltz legislation includes the burning of woody biomass. Now, I'm sorry, if you burn trees at an accelerated rate, you are producing carbon dioxide. It's why, it's some of the most dirty stuff that you can burn, which is why they, in part, they evacuate people from the areas of forest fires, not just to prevent them from getting burned, but also because the air quality that they're breathing in, fine particulate matter that can do a lot of damage to your respiratory system. And if you have existing conditions, like many of our Black, Brown, Indigenous folk do, whether it's bronchitis or asthma, and whatnot, this is even worse. For instance, right, we know that Black, Brown, Indigenous communities who tend to live closer to these facilities that burn coal or wood mass, we had a 10% higher or 10 times higher COVID morbidity rate just because of where we lived and what we were breathing. So woody biomass is definitely not carbon free. So that's one.
Wow.
But it also includes two very controversial technologies which have been pushed by the Biden administration via the so-called Inflation Reduction Act: carbon capture and sequestration and hydrogen combustion. All told, the tax breaks that the fossil fuel industry will be getting from using these technologies. So essentially taxpayers will be paying the industry most responsible for the climate crisis to continue doing what they're doing, upwards of $150 billion in the next 5 years. And Walz's bill also supports use of these technologies, also supports the use and expansion of nuclear energy. Nuclear energy may not emit carbon dioxide, but what goes into building these plants and the extraction, mainly from indigenous land, for the uranium needed to power them, are absolutely deleterious to the environment, and specifically water quality. And then finally, what I'll say about 2040 bill, this is the most interesting, is that existing facilities will be exempted from having to adhere to these new rules if they convert to frack gas, right? So
wait, we're back to fracking?
So, well, right. So, and this is in line with Vice President Harris's, I think it's the only policy proposal we've gotten from her on climate change, right? That was an announcement that she would not be supporting a national ban on fracking, as she did when she was a candidate in 2019. So all to say, and then to last thing I'll say, to facilitate this bill, he signed what's known as a permitting reform bill. We know it in environmental justice circles. Permitting reform is just a fancy word, a bourgeois way of saying deregulation.
Wow.
And so essentially, he's going to shorten the time for environmental reviews to allow for the proliferation of quote unquote clean energy. But this also would apply to fossil fuel projects as well, as we're seeing right now in the national phase. So all said, I would not call that progressive myself. And you know, I'll stop for a second and then give you an example of what I think would be considered progressive, if not radical. And what we need right now is radical. We need to turn this normal situation of capitalist-fueled, racialized climate catastrophe. That's we need to make that radical and normalize what people that we're calling for, like us, who have helped presidential candidates with some of their platforms, the ones who actually want to release platforms, with what we would call a more radical, transformative, and quite frankly, necessary approach, being where we are in human history.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because, you know, ever since the Democratic coup, ever since the Democratic Party switched out their candidates
Yeah.
and instructed Joe Biden to go sit down somewhere, and chose Harris to as the candidate, or as the presumptive candidate. I have to keep saying that. There have been people who have been extremely critical of people who have criticized the fact that there is no policy platform on
Right.
Presumptive candidate Harris's website. This is not an opinion, folks. This is fact. If you go to her website, it is a campaign fundraiser, basically. Please give me money.
Yep.
There is her platform, her policy platform is not on the website yet. And so people have been very, very emotionally just hypercritical of people who, and that's being polite, of people who are accurately criticizing the fact that we don't know what presumptive nominee Harris's policies are, since people have said, you know, look, you can't judge her by Biden's policies because she was just the vice president. And we're in a very weird time, Anthony, where people, on the one hand, people are saying, and I guess because Trump said it, that the vice president really doesn't do anything. They don't really have any, it's not important. They don't really set any policy. But was not presumptive nominee Harris put in charge of the border issue when she was vice president? And did she not come out and basically tell people who were fleeing their countries because of U.S. foreign policy in their countries, told them don't come to the U.S., got on television at that podium and said a few times, do not come here, and has announced, now that she is the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party, has come out and said, I am going to be tough on immigration. We need tough border policies, right? So these are not opinions we are expressing. These are things she has actually said and done.
Yeah.
So it's okay to cover those things, but people don't like it when you do that, Anthony. So at the
Well,
same time, people are saying, what look, when Kamala Harris was when Kamala Harris was vice president, she couldn't do anything to influence policy because she didn't have any power. But now that she has chosen Tim Walz as her vice president, he is the progressive that's going to make all the difference in her policies. Which one is it? Which one is it,
yeah.
y'all?
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear that you're absolutely right. There are a lot of contradictions that are trying to be navigated that simply can't be. You have people who I think, as Democratic operative David Axelrod himself said, are being driven by irrational exuberance. That's how he put it, and that's Axelrod who brought us Obama. So take that for what you will. But on the one hand, you'll see certain bourgeois environmental groups lauding the fact that, oh, she cast a deciding vote on the Inflation Reduction Act to get it passed in the Senate. And she's been a partner with Biden. She went to Dubai last year in his place to speak at the annual Global Climate Conference, the Conference of Parties, which is being held this year for the third time in a row in a fossil fuel producing state. So, I mean, they take that conference with a grain of salt. But law, and then of course going back to her days as a attorney general and DA in the state of California for all the amazing environmental work, justice work that she did. But now when it's time to hold her accountable, I mean, we've heard some excuses as egregious as, there's not enough time to develop a robust climate policy platform. And I'm like, y'all just raised like $250 million. You just raised $250 million.
That
But
right
you
there.
can't seem to get like some people together to draft a policy position. I think that at some point this is going to come back to haunt the Harris campaign, and you're already starting to see it, right? I mean, James Carville, another Democratic, strategist, is the sugar high is going to end. You're going to have to do interviews. You're going to have to answer questions about policy, right? And if you can't do that, what are people actually voting for? And that's why it's kind of been frustrating to see so-called environmental groups jumping on board, because it's like, okay, what are we voting for the Biden policies that she was a part of, or was she not a part of the policies and she's going to come out with her own? And further compounding that frustration, or at least me being befuddled about it, is that this is a person who just said, I'm not going to ban fracking, which is a very environmentally destructive practice that also uses profligate amounts of water. But what we can say, though, is that, like, on the issue of permitting reform, aka deregulation, Joe Manchin has just worked with Senator Barrasso of Wyoming for a very, very dangerous bill that they're calling the Energy Permitting Reform Act, that would essentially take away people's due process to sue and whatnot. And what a former Democratic Senate aide who was granted anonymity said to Politico was that despite the more progressive stances Harris carved out in 2019, quote unquote, she's a pretty middle of the road Democrat who, as a former legislator and vice president, is fully capable of understanding negotiations require trade-offs. So in other words, we're going to have to sacrifice some people in order to get the larger picture of what we are, which is what we did with the Inflation Reduction Act. So, I mean, that said, we know that this is not going to be a person who implements like real Green New Deal policies, like declaring a climate emergency that would give the president the National Emergencies Act, Defense Production Act, and Stafford Act to pretty much just end oil and gas leasing as we know it with those presidential powers. This is a presidential candidate who is not going to codify the 17 principles of environmental justice as other candidates, including Dr. Stein and Claudia de la Cruz, have called for. I'd be surprised if Vice President Harris or Walz even know what the 17 principles of environmental justice are, much less codify them, which would also grant free, prior, and informed consent to our indigenous people. Because right now, the US government has its eyes set on the critical minerals that are right now available on the continent. They want them here to dig them up here in the United States, and the vast majority of them happen to be located on sovereign indigenous land, which I think is a delicious irony. What's going to save the world is on sovereign indigenous territory. But if they don't have free, prior, and informed consent, corporations will either turn them against each other, shower money on a few people in tribal governments. Like, we got to be honest and clear. We're not dissing our indigenous siblings when we also say that governments are governments, and even tribal governments can be bought and sold by corporations. They're not immune to that, and that could happen. And then this is not a president that's going to rescind the toxic elements of the Inflation Reduction Act. So this is a president who's going to continue then the policies of Joe Biden, who approved more oil and gas leasing on federal lands and waters than his predecessor, Donald Trump, and also a president who has presided over the largest amount of oil and gas output in the history of the United States. This August, it broke the record of its previous record, which was last August. So the United States of America has become a petro-state under the Biden administration, and appears that Harris would continue that. So again, you have to ask yourself why environmental groups are jumping on board. Are they more aligned with, and are they more dedicated to the issue that they are fighting for, which is climate change, or are they more aligned with and have their allegiance with the Democratic Party? And to me, that's a big problem. We should not be putting anything or the party over anything. Political parties are supposed to be vehicles and nothing more to get you to the destination of what you're seeking. In my case, climate justice. The Democratic Party has not proven to be that vehicle, and therefore I don't think that they should get unfettered support. And it's not even strategic, because you endorsed. There's no policy platform. So how are you going to push for policies now, because you already endorsed as well? So it's not even a good strategy politically. In addition to, we can just go ahead and call it politically and electorally feckless.
And what you just said about this country being now the largest producer of oil, becoming a petro-state under the Biden administration, took me in a whole nother direction, Anthony. And because we have to go there, because that, I think, connects a whole bunch of other stuff that I know we're only going to have time to touch on, but that's okay. Yeah. You're going to come back.
And just quickly, sister, this is including the neoliberal policies of Joe Biden's former boss, Barack Obama, where oil and gas production increased 36% in the 8 years that he was president.
So this is the thing, Anthony. Okay, and real quick, just to remind you folks who are just tuning in, if you're a little bit late tuning in, that's okay, but don't do it again. Don't be late next Friday. This is Darker Than Blue here on WPFW 89.3. I'm your host, Jackie Lukman. I am joined by climate justice advocate Anthony Rogers-Wright, comrade, friend, brother. We were talking about Tim Waltz and his progressive bona fides. But Anthony, you just mentioned that the U.S. is now a petro-state under Joe Biden. And we're talking about just 4 years ago, right? That this didn't begin happening, but it was solidified, right? It began under Obama. This increased production of U.S. oil, because we remember the narratives, right? We need to not be reliant on foreign oil. America needs to become oil independent. And that had been the Republican line, right? Because that went along with the chants of drill, baby, drill. Remember drill, right. Baby, drill in the Republican National Convention, when what was it? John McCain picked Sarah Palin. I will never forget that convention, and those people standing in there going, drill, baby, drill. This woman was talking about putting more oil rigs off the coast of Alaska. And these people were like, drill, baby, drill. Oh my God, y'all want to.
And even California, Right. I mean, even Schwarzenegger kind of told her to step off with that idea. But I mean, I think all of this, what you're saying is really, really important because it's oil and frack gas, right?
Right.
Because now what I'll say about Joe Manchin, right, the soon to be former senator of West Virginia, is that he has been an adversary of mine since I've gotten into this work. But what I will tell you about Joe Manchin is that he is an honest adversary. Okay. And in that sense, I mean, there's a strange side of me. People, listeners, don't take this the wrong way. I'm not a supporter of Manchin, but I appreciate an honest adversary because it's like I believe in what I'm telling you so much, even though I it's so harmful to you that I'm gonna name it. And Manchin is like the only lawmaker, one of the few lawmakers, at least Democrat now independent, that you'll find is like, look, we got to increase our output of frack gas to send to our allies in Ukraine for proving that it is a feckless fossil fueled war.
There it is.
Pipeline, everybody, we all know what happened to it and who's responsible for it. And then on top of that, saying we must never allow Russia to be the primary producer of frack gas in Europe again. So Manchin is just saying, look, yeah, this is for war and United States empire hegemony. And he's at least being honest about it, right? I mean, I have a friend when I was living in California who said that, during the Iraq war, if George W. Bush was just honest with the U.S. population, people would have probably gone with him. He was like, look, we got to invade Iraq. If you want to continue your way of life and these suburban homes and your lost weekends, we got to find a source of energy for this. It's Iraq. We're going to take it. People to be like, well, yeah, I guess I like my microwave and my house that I can afford 40 miles from Los Angeles, to keep living like this. So
I like my $2 a gallon gas.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't care how many people have to die for it.
What's really important is I mean, and I would say that it's what has me shaking my head the most at Democratic Party acolytes, talking heads, and some of their allies, or sycophants or whatever in the larger climate community is attempting to beguile the public with Project 2025. Right, it is the big evil, and we can't allow it to be implemented. And what I've been saying, well, if y'all are so against Project 2025, you should probably tell the Democrats to stop implementing aspects of it in 2022 and 2023, because they've been implementing aspects of Project 2025 already by opening up 600 million acres of the Gulf of Mexico per the Inflation Reduction Act, by so-called NEPA has already been rolled back by Joe Biden when he signed the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023.
What's NEPA?
All of these things literally directly called for in Project 2025, like the Willow Project in Alaska, were approved by Joe Biden.
Wow.
So I'm just saying that people need to understand that Project 2025 environmentally is already in full effect, which is why I have this piece coming out with Black Agenda Report next week called "There Isn't Enough Daylight Environmentally Between the Biden and Democratic Party Policies and Project 2025, Not Enough Daylight to Fuel a Solar Panel."
Wow. So Manchin sort of answered the question that I was going to ask, because we see these other things happening all around the world that if you just look at them individually, they make no sense. They're not connected to anything. It's just, some weird international intrigue, or, those brown people, messing up again. And, what are those Africans angry about this time? But when you look at the fact that the U.S. is now a petro nation.
Yes.
In just, let's say, less than 15 years. And then you look at all of the coups, wars, sanctions regimes, meddling in elections that the United States government has been involved in since the Obama administration: Libya, Iraq, Venezuela, Cuba, AFRICOM expansion under Obama, right? And now we have the proxy war using Ukraine against Russia. And now we have this genocide of Palestinians in Gaza committed by the Zionist apartheid entity. I do not call them Israel. I have made up my own name for them to keep from using that name. This whole thing, The entire refusal, I think, of the Democratic Party to do anything substantive about environmental issues, it really is tied to the need, not the need, because we don't really need oil, but the lust for it, the greed for oil, all of these horrible foreign policies, all of these wars and coups and entanglements and sanctioning countries and recognizing people who didn't win elections in other countries. This is all about getting access to oil and
Yeah.
other resources that exists in these regions, isn't it, Anthony?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's ironic. There's an amazing book, and our amazing producer, who's watching your show with us, reminded me to give a plug for the new show.
Yes.
I got you, Katya. Full Spectrum with Anthony Rogers-Wright. And it starts on Tuesday of next week. We include a segment called the Burn Notice. And the Burn Notice is, an unapologetically Black lens on the climate crisis. And one of my dear friends, and one of the people who I hope to bring on to interviews, a great author named Holly Jean Buck. She's a professor at the University of Buffalo. She's brilliant. And she says in her book, Ending Fossil Fuels, that climate change may be the least important reason to get off of fossil fuels, to the point that you made, because of what fossil fuels do to not just the socioeconomic aspects of it and geopolitical aspects of world peace, right? You talked about U.S. intervention. Who is one of the biggest oil producers in the Western Hemisphere of the United States, the Bolivarian Independent Republic of Venezuela. And with the rise of some more leftist governments, more or less Petro in Colombia, Boric in Chile, and so forth. If they develop relationships with Presidente Maduro and essentially have their own independent way of producing energy, South America is no longer dependent on the United States for a thing. As a matter of fact, the United States will become more dependent on South America because of the critical mineral deposits in countries like Bolivia and Chile and Argentina, Ecuador, and other places. So, you've got what it does is it does create this prelude to war whenever there. I mean, let's think about it. Russia's biggest export was their oil and gas.
Right.
Western powers went in there and messed with Russia's ability to make money. If you mess with somebody's ability to make money and not expect a reaction, you're either a fool or a neoliberal or both. So
why not both?
Right. So now you're seeing a similar situation in Venezuela. Like, what is it about Venezuela that the U.S. hates so much? Why Venezuela? There are other countries, quote unquote, with authoritarian, quote unquote, leaders, but Venezuela represents this quintessential threat. It's because they've got a bunch of oil, and therefore are competitors with the United States's petro hegemony that they want to maintain over Europe, over Africa, over South America. So that's what I believe Holly Jean Buck is saying, like, just in terms of like war and the threat of war, this is why we need to get off of fossil fuels. And then we, of course, know, as we talk about as members of the Black Alliance for Peace, that there's an axiomatic nexus between rising militarism and rising climate calamities. Military, and then everything that happens after those climate calamities leads to more militarism, which is something that I talk about with Walz as well. This is a governor who increased despite crime is going down, blah, 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 right? We always hear it, but that doesn't stop investment in state-sanctioned police forces. Walz increased the budget of the I was going to call it the Minnesota military, might as well, military, the state, law enforcement by 66%. He gave it $300 million, even though crime is apparently going down. Continuing his trend, it wasn't President Trump who unleashed the National Guard against our people who were uprising following the public lynching of George Floyd. that was Waltz who sent them in. And then, and just to compound it even more, fossil fuel infrastructure leads to more militarized police. Our dear sister Tara Housegren can talk about it, but it's public knowledge that Waltz deputized basically a private military IDF trained, Israeli Defense Force trained force to protect that pipeline. And they really were brutal and draconian to water protectors like Tara House, the GNU Collective, and many others who are now supporting Waltz, but who got on buses to go and help Tara fight that Line 3 pipeline. I guess, the selfies and whatnot. Same thing we saw at Standing Rock's, Comrade Jackie. But now Waltz is the, if you will, the great white climate hope. So that militarism aspect is really cannot be discounted in any way, both domestically and internationally. Fossil fuels is sort of like the neoliberal corporate version of cocaine or fentanyl. It literally does cause there to be paramilitary disputes over who is going to control not just the production of it, but the distribution of it, as well. And that's another reason why we got to get off of this stuff. If Venezuela didn't have oil, people would probably never even hear about it. People would never even hear about it. The U.S. would have no reason to be intervening. And after, basically anointing someone who people did not vote for in the primary as the nominee for a major political party, deign to go and even question the legitimacy of Venezuela's democracy. You can't make it up. And as these fossil fuel people, I like to say, they're greasy, but they're not slick.
And see, this is why I love doing this show. This is why I love doing what I do. This is why I love political education and I love organizing, because when you understand that everything that goes on around the world is actually connected to you, because you do live inside the beating heart of the driver of the conflicts around the world, you understand, you begin to understand, you had better understand that the United Front, the United Front we have to build against fascism is a united front that all of us have to build, bringing all of our interests together, connecting those interests, because the connections are there, y'all. These connections are there, bringing all of these interests together and fighting for the future that we want against this fascism. We have to smash this fascism as this empire crumbles. As the empire crumbles, it's just going to get more intense, but it does not mean we can't win. I believe we can. If I didn't think we could win, I wouldn't waste my time doing this. So we are out of time for this week, but I need you to come back next week, because we're going to talk more about this united front against fascism that we have to build with some other people. And we're going to keep talking about it for the next few months, hopefully years, until we actually get it done. But until then, thank you so much for tuning in to Darker Than Blue. I'm Jackie Lukman. This is WPFW 89.3, changing the world one broadcast at a time. See you next week. Peace.
All right, sis, I'm out.
Just a few minutes. Thank y'all so much for hanging out for a few minutes. Thank you for tuning in to Darker Than Blue today. I was so glad Anthony was able to come on, because I don't understand the climate stuff as much as he understands it. I have a very surface level understanding of a lot of the phrases, just the way they talk about things. I don't know what that stuff means, but I know he does. So I'm always excited to have him on. I may have him on again next week, because we didn't get into like the serious connections between Ukraine and Venezuela and Nicaragua and Cuba, Africa, and why the U.S. is really so interested in controlling these countries. We touched on it a little bit, but you know me, I like to go way down in the weeds, because I really need people to understand that I'm not being contrarian just to be contrarian. I don't have time for that. I am opposing a system that I know full well is killing our people. And my business is fighting for the liberation of our people. That is my job. That is my command. That is what I'm here to do. That is why I believe I am still here. So I cannot have surface level discussions. I cannot let people who want to misunderstand or conflate what I do and say and make it mean something other than what I'm saying. And I mean, I got accused of being a closet Trump supporter again. And I'm like, cool, if that's what you hear when I talk about how this entire system is oppressive and hateful and destructive and deadly to us all, if what you hear is I support Trump, all right, cool. I can't, because I can't fix your hearing. I cannot fix your hearing if I can't fix what's going on in the messed up wiring in your brain. If I do all of this explaining and give you all of this information and bring people in to give you more in-depth information, and all you hear is, oh, why are you going to do this? You're going to support Trump? Cool. If that's the way your brain works, I can't help you. I cannot help you. This is not for you. That's all right. But for all of you who understand that the key to us surviving this historical moment and the key to us winning and building the society that we need for our people to truly thrive, we need to understand every aspect of this system as much as we possibly can, so that we don't replicate the same oppressive, neoliberal, imperialist, capitalist, patriarchal, sexist, misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, racist, ableist. We cannot make the same mistakes. We cannot replicate any of the garbage we live under right now. We cannot. And the only way we can make sure that we don't replicate everything that's wrong, we need to understand everything that's wrong. That's why I do what I do. So, no double feature today because we've got an emergency meeting in a bit. Got to be involved in that. Got to do some reading. Got a big old meeting tomorrow. More reading I have to do tonight. So thank you all for hanging out with me today. See you next Friday on Darker Than Blue. And I might have a double feature next Friday. I'm planning on it. There is another announcement. It was supposed to have been made today, but some things changed. Some things changed. I cannot tell you what the announcement is because somebody else has to make it. I'm just involved in it. But I will tell you that when the announcement is scheduled for next week, it will be scheduled to be broadcast on this platform. So when the announcement is made, you will hear about it at the same time as everybody else. And yeah, that is really all I can say at this moment. Other than I just need y'all to remember that I'm an organizer. And anytime anybody is going to give me an opportunity to organize on a bigger scale than what I am doing right now, if that's going to help our people, if that's going to help us get closer to building this united front against fascism, oh, I'm going to jump at it. I'm going to jump at it. And whatever fallout happens, yeah, you know, I let the chips fall where they may, but I got to organize our people. So just keep that in mind. See y'all next week. Be good to yourselves. Be good to each other. A luta continua. This struggle continues. But I promise you all, if we keep fighting, I promise the struggle will be won. We will be victorious. Victoria acerta. Victory is certain. Peace, y'all.